Mr. Speaker, in response to the public's perception that rental rates within the province had unreasonable and unpredictable spikes during the pandemic, Premier Higgs called for a 90-day rental review. Our Premier made this call because we want our decisions to be driven by evidence-based data, which is why the 90-day review of the rental landscape in New Brunswick was undertaken. A project team was assembled, and that team took the time to correctly identify the issues by reviewing existing data, listening and speaking to stakeholders, including apartment owners, tenants, and learning from other jurisdictions. Mr. Speaker, the project team had representatives from 9 provincial departments because government recognized that there are no quick fixes to the complex issue of affordable housing within the rental market. Not one department or organization held all the answers or solutions. Tenants, landlords, developers, community advocacy groups, businesses, banks, municipal planners, and other stakeholders participated in the review, which included 19 engagement sessions, 8 group workshops, with over 170 attendees, and an online survey with over 5,500 responses. Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to say that we now have a report that gives an accurate depiction of the rental market with recommendations that are based on reality and how to move forward. While the report is clear, there is no one quick fix to this complex issue. However, it will guide government in its decision-making, and it will assist us in identifying concrete actions that we can take moving forward. The solutions lie within the collective action by all levels of government, as well as support from non-profit organizations, businesses, and community organizations. Mr. Speaker, Service New Brunswick will continue to work with the Department of Social Development and all other partners on the recommendations and actions contained in the review of the rental landscape in New Brunswick. Given that one of the recommendations in the report calls for the modernization of the Residential Tenancies Act, this goes much further than the targeted amendments put forward by the Green Party. Through the review process, we heard there are gaps in access to affordable and adequate housing for many New Brunswickers, especially for newcomers and single parents. We know from national organizations like the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation that New Brunswick is facing an upward pressure on rents due to a higher increase in rental demand relative to supply in most of the province's urban centres. This is similar to what is happening across the country, with lower vacancy levels than in the past and generally higher rents. This is putting pressure on access to affordable housing. These challenges existed before the pandemic, however, have since amplified due to the pandemic. The challenges identified includes an existing gap between what New Brunswickers need and what is available on the rental market. The costs of building and maintaining rental units are rising. Lower cost housing units are reported as inadequate. Many New Brunswickers are making hard choices to stay housed and feel unprotected. Developing affordable housing can be full of roadblocks, and communities in rural areas have unique challenges. Mr. Speaker, the review also identified solutions that are already underway. It put forward new recommendations that acknowledge and address the complex and interrelated challenges of ensuring affordable housing. The recommendations encompass initiatives such as strengthening existing government services, providing incentives for landlords and developers, reviewing and revising the New Brunswick Residential Tenancies Act to provide better protection against unreasonable rent increases, ensuring the recruitment of future construction workers and builders, and creating new partnerships with organizations such as the New Brunswick Multicultural Council and the New Brunswick Business Council. The review makes it clear that there's no quick fix for affordable housing and that any proposed solutions must fit into the larger picture. Mr. Speaker, Service New Brunswick is ready to do its part. The Residential Tenancies Act has been in place since 1975 and has been subject to amendments since that time. The Residential Tenancies Tribunal is responsible for all residential tenancies in the province. This includes apartments, rented homes, and rooming and boarding houses. The role of the residential tenancies officers is to educate and inform tenants and landlords of their rights and responsibilities, investigate complaints, administer the Security Deposit Trust Fund, adjudicate matters that cannot be resolved by mediation, enforce the rules and regulations, and offer mediation services. They do a great job, and in fact, the example I had is the one that the member opposite just brought up, actually a couple of them. So just last week, a tenant was indeed facing a $2,000 rent increase, and it wasn't due to the pressure from social media, Mr. Speaker, that this was resolved. What happened was, in fact, a residential tenancy employee saw the notice on social media and informed our team. One of our residential tenancy officers called the landlord to ask questions about the increase. The landlord provided the tenant information. Our office reached out to the tenant to discuss the matter. Upon further discussion with both the tenant and the landlord agreed to withdraw the increase. So I think those individuals that did intervene as quickly as they possibly could. The other case that the member opposite mentioned was a case last fall that was actually in my riding here in the Oromocto, Lincoln, Fredericton area, where a tenant felt she had to move due to a rent increase. Other tenants in the same building who also received significant rent increases reached out to the Residential Tenancies Tribunal and had their increases denied by the tribunal because, as long-term tenants, they were protected under the Act. And I also want to mention a lot of people are really unaware of the services that the Residential Tenancies Tribunal provides, and it's a shame that I think sometimes talking about how people are afraid to call the Residential Tenancy Tribunal kind of just, it stirs the pot, because people should not be afraid to call. The RTT is there to help landlords, to help tenants. Representatives of landlords can call in, representatives of tenants can call in, and a lot of people are unaware as well that in the Act, if they are living in unsafe living conditions, they can call us and we will intervene, and we will make sure the landlord will take care of those problems. Also, I will mention that the legislation was amended in the last session to protect individuals in abusive relationships so that they can get out of leases. And discrimination against families with children should reach out to the Residential Tenancies Tribunal, and they should also file a complaint with the Human Rights Commission. As I have said many times, Mr. Speaker, if tenants are facing issues with their landlord, I strongly encourage them to reach out to the tribunal. The tribunal has an excellent track record of being able to successfully mediate issues between landlords and tenants. Mr. Speaker, the tribunal has played an important role in protecting tenants' rights since its inception in 1975 and continues to play an important role in the rental market. However, times have changed, and we are prepared to review the Act and make amendments to ensure it is meeting today's challenges and needs. Under the Residential Tenancies Act, there is protection for tenants against retaliatory rent increases and notices of rent increase reviews on long-term tenancies to ensure compliance with reasonable market values. As well, the review heard that rent protection is a significant concern for tenants. We are willing to look at how we can address those concerns and how we can offer better protection. Right now, New Brunswick's legislation is closely aligned with the majority of other jurisdictions in Canada in its approach to rent increases. However, one area where New Brunswick differs from the majority of other jurisdictions is in terms of the permitted frequency of rent increases. Mr. Speaker, currently there are no limits on the frequency of rent increases, while in most jurisdictions, rent increases are limited to once per year. This is something that we will be looking at. Implementing rent controls can have long-reaching positive and negative repercussions on stakeholders, and we will be reviewing and considering our approach carefully from a systems lens. It is important to note that despite legislative rent control, British Columbia and Ontario both consistently see a rise in rent well above the Canadian average. Closer to home, the province of PEI has the strictest rent control in the country, yet it is facing the same affordable housing issues as New Brunswick. Mr. Speaker, the issue in New Brunswick is low inventory at 2.6%. Over the years, Inventory has been high, which means lots of options for renters, and inventory has been low, in which we are currently experiencing. We have had periods where the inventory, therefore the vacancy rate, has been right around where it should be at about 3%. In relation to this bill, the question is whether the solution being proposed by the opposition will address the real issue of low inventory, which is what we are experiencing today, and it will address the other factors that impact affordable housing as outlined in the review. Or will it make the situation worse? No, it won't address the bigger issues, Mr. Speaker. In fact, it will have the opposite effect. It will have a negative impact on the affordable housing market overall. It will reduce inventory even further as developers will not invest in housing. In fact, we saw this in Nova Scotia with developers putting capital projects on hold or scaled back due to the rent caps that were introduced in that province last fall. Mr. Speaker, the 90-day rental review looked at the issue from multiple lenses. While there is a problem with affordable housing that has been impacted by the pandemic, the report also had some good news. It shows that the New Brunswick economy has been steadily improving with positive economic and population growth trends, as well as some household-level economic gains. New Brunswick's response to the pandemic has put us on the map, and that is great news for us as a province. However, the report has also highlighted affordable housing challenges that we are ready to tackle, Mr. Speaker. The review also clearly noted that New Brunswick is not currently in a housing crisis, as the system is working for many. And that is good news. However, I do understand that this may not sound like good news to those that the system is not working for. Mr. Speaker, we want to make the system work for those people as well. However, it is important to note that the review states that we are not in a housing crisis, but it could become a crisis if we do not pay attention. Mr. Speaker, we are paying attention, and this government is prepared to act. We have a report that has taken a holistic approach to ensure the issue of affordable housing includes the many different perspectives. Mr. Speaker, we took the time to correctly identify the issue by doing the research, by speaking to stakeholders, including apartment owners and tenants. The Rental Review Committee was also provided with ample research that has been done and shows that rent controls do not work. In fact, the research shows that rent control and caps lead to reluctance by landlords to invest in and maintain properties, which in turn reduces the number and quality of units available, which was another issue highlighted in the report. There is no question we currently have a lack of housing inventory in our province. So let's talk about some of the advantages and disadvantages of rent control and whether it will solve this problem. Advantages to tenants for implementing rent control are relative certainty regarding the cost of rent over the length of the tenancy agreement and savings versus the cost of market rent over the length of the tenancy. It would mitigate the risks of large and/or unexpected rent increases, frequent rent increases, displacement, getting priced out of a preferred neighbourhood, rent increasing faster than income, and assist tenants less likely to be mobile to afford to stay in the current premises or preferred area. Taking away the ability for landlords to set rent at market price may protect tenants and theoretically allow fairness in the distribution of housing to those who need it at a price they can afford. Mr. Speaker, there are rarely advantages without disadvantages. So let's look at the disadvantages for tenants. Lower rent for current tenants could result in a much higher rent for future tenants if landlords are permitted to raise rent without restriction between tenants, as landlords seek to recoup past losses of rent and set rent high in preparation for tenancies continuing for long periods of time. Landlords may avoid renting to those tenants they assume could stay in a premise for a protected period. If rent control regulations in New Brunswick contain exemptions, example for properties built before or after a certain time, or for premises with less than a certain number of units, the new units are likely to be much more expensive than the older ones, eliminating housing options for people with less money. Advantages to landlords for implementing rent control is the main benefit appears to be that tenants in rent control apartments may be increasingly motivated to hold on to those apartments as the financial benefit becomes greater over time, which may result in better behaved tenants who consistently pay rent on time and a reduction in turnover. Mr. Speaker, It is clear the opposition has not done their homework, but we have. We have concrete, actionable recommendations that give us a path forward, and will address it. Mr. Speaker, for that reason, we do not support this bill.